Hey, good morning to you. It's a beautiful, beautiful morning here on the east coast of the U.S. Chilly. I got my cold weather gear on. When it's down in the 20s, yeah, now I'm not gonna mess around with that. Okay, it's just amazing. Um, so yeah, good to be with you after a bit of a long weekend. We had a holiday. I completely forgot that yesterday was President's Day. And so normally when we've got these kind of holidays, my schedule is just not the same. I don't get up normal time, it's just one of those things. So I hope you had a great long weekend if you were among those who had the day off, and looking forward to starting a shorter work week. Tuesday's the new Monday today, right? So we're all good. So good morning to Carol and Jane, Jack, Maria, Derek. Great to see you guys. Appreciate you jumping in here to hang out for a few minutes. So, we are continuing to look at the life of Jesus. It is without a doubt one of the most important and rewarding studies or just decisions I think that we could ever make, is to just spend time to understand the kind of life that Jesus led here on the earth. And once again, not simply to admire and worship and praise him for that, but to understand that he, as the prototype of a new race of supernatural uh, beings that are humans that contain God. Okay, we are looking at him and listening to him to understand what our lives really are meant to be. Uh, it's what the Father had in mind from the beginning, was to create us and to have us live the kind of life that we see Jesus living here in the Gospels. The quality of that life, right? We're not saying that we're going to copy his lifestyle in the sense of how he walked around and preached and ministered full time. That's not our, going to be our calling. We'll each still be working in the areas that we have been created to function in and to function well. But in those arenas, we get to live like Christ. We get to be Jesus to the world around us. And that's the focus of everything that we want to um, really receive and allow for a transformation process to occur in us. The Lord is absolutely giving us an extra measure of grace and perseverance this year, that we would go after that that transformation, so that excuse me, a little morning frog, get out. That transformation that will absolutely position us to represent Jesus, the Father, the kingdom, all of that with excellence, in the next year or so, as we really focus on these things. So that's what we're all about. And oh man, I don't know why this frog is sticking around. So Joanne, good to see you. Linda and Melly, good morning. So we're going to look at some more of Matthew 5 today, um, because these things that Jesus is saying to us and saying to the folks, obviously, that he was speaking to, are so important. But you can actually look at the teachings of Christ and the things that he said from two different perspectives, one of which is really not applicable to us anymore as those who are in this new covenant. So when Jesus spoke all of these different things here in Matthew 5, where he's challenging the Jews concerning their perception of sin, right? They, living under the law, living in a regime where you had to obey and do certain things at certain times and all of that. Um, it was very easy to kind of dumb it down in the sense that, well, I'm going to do these things, but the rest of my life is mine, and you can't say anything about that. If I want to, engage in sinful thoughts, about someone or about whatever, well, I'm not doing that thing, so, leave me alone. Well, Jesus made it very clear that sin starts in the mind, right? It starts in our thoughts, that you can't sin about, you can't do any kind of sin unless you've thought about it. It's really what he's saying, right? And so he amplified the power of the law to the hearers in his day, because he wanted them and us as well to understand that it's an impossibility for us to ever become righteous in our own ability and our own strength by obeying the law perfectly. We just can't do it. So now, under this new covenant that we're in, it's a whole different thing. Okay. We don't look at, or we shouldn't look at this in the same way that they did under the old covenant. Now, let me say this first before we move on. There are actually people who take this idea of us being under the new covenant, and because Jesus said all these things prior to his crucifixion, they make a case saying that, well, this doesn't apply to us. We don't have to look at this stuff and worry about any of this, because this was all Jesus talking, under the old covenant before he was crucified and brought the new covenant in. Now, that's absurd on its face, because number one, this is Jesus talking, right? So when he speaks here about making friends with your opponent, if you goes into this whole thing about divorce, not making vows, right? Talking about, let your yes be yes, your no be no, the whole eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth thing. Instead of that, somebody wants to sue you and take your shirt, give them your coat also. He goes into all these different ways of really expanding what the law is saying, the spirit of the law as opposed to the letter of it, right? And so a lot of folks, I don't want to say, maybe it's not a lot, but there are some people who actually teach that none of this applies to us because we're under the new covenant. Now, the reality of it is, right? Yes, we are not under the old covenant, which means we are not to look at all of this and attempt to fulfill it in order to gain God's approval, his love, his blessing, his acceptance, whatever word you want to plug in there. It's not meant for us to try to do these things. And that's because, as we've mentioned, and let me just look this up for you again so that we're all on the same page, right? In Romans 12, Paul writes this, that Romans 8. Romans 12 is a great chapter, but it's not the one I want. In Romans 8, right, it says in verse 3 that what the law could not do, weak as it was, through the flesh, God did, sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh. And as an offering for sin, he condemned sin in the flesh, in order that, verse 4, that the requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. So you and I now, as new covenant believers, as sons and daughters of God, we are absolutely freed from the necessity to look at the laws that are in the Bible and attempt to strive after obeying them perfectly, because we can't. In our human ability, we simply can't. So God said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send Jesus. He will fulfill the law perfectly in every way. And I'm going to have you, my children, put into Christ and have Christ put into you. Therefore, the perfect fulfillment of the law that Jesus accomplished is now ours by impartation, by union with Christ. Okay? So we're not engaged in trying to fulfill every single law that is set forth in the Bible. Why? Because Jesus already did that for us, and he is now in us. Therefore, we fulfill the law by virtue of Christ being in us. Now, does that mean that we ignore, as some would have you believe, that we would ignore all these things that Jesus said? Absolutely not. Here's how we need to look at this. When Jesus talks about these various ways of responding to life, responding to people, what he's really saying now to us as born again sons and daughters of God, that we, because of Christ in us, are now capable of doing all of these things. We're now able to actually do what Jesus said. Why? Because I'm no longer attempting to try to do this on my own. I'm not trying to figure this out and trying to obey every jot and tittle, as it says in the King James Version of the law. That's not my job. My job is to rest in the finished work of Christ and know that, for example, he talks here in Matthew 5:25 about someone that takes you to court, right? Or is an opponent in some way. Doesn't have to be in a court situation. It could just be somebody who is an opponent. He's against you. This person doesn't like you. They say bad things about you. Okay, well, we have a choice in how am I going to respond to that? And what Jesus is saying here, in essence, is make friends with that person. Well, how can I do that? That person doesn't like me. They're saying all these negative and nasty things. How in the world am I going to make friends with someone like that? Right? Well, Jesus is saying we're capable of doing this now. So what does it look like? When someone is against us, they typically have formed an opinion of us that it could be 100% a lie. In other words, what they're believing about us, it's possible that it's all completely a lie. But that is very rare. Generally, people form negative opinions of us because of something that we did, something that we said that they found offensive, or that it just upset them in some way, right? So, how do you make friends with somebody like that? How about, hey, could we have a conversation? Because I really would like to hear more about why you're upset with me, why you're angry with me, And you do that from the standpoint of, well, maybe there's something here that I need to pay attention to, right? maybe they actually have seen something in me that needs to change. And how would I ever know that unless I give a little credence to the fact that there might just be something here that I need to address in my life, right? And so, and I realize there's limits to that. Okay, I realize that there are people out there that they're not rational. All right, so I'm not trying to say that you have to. The Bible does say, live at peace with all men as far as it depends on you. All right, so I'm just trying to give you an example here of how we can respond in a way that is completely different. Now, listen, if I had to do that in my own strength, forget about it. It's not happening. It's just not. Okay. But now, anytime I find out that somebody's upset with me, my first response is, all right, Lord, I know that I can have a conversation with this person at some point. Maybe they're too mad at me now, that they're not going to be able to talk to me. But at some point, I know that I can have a conversation with them and I can find out, okay, so what's going on here? Tell me what I did wrong. Teach me, show me. All right. And you can go on and on through the rest of this passage, right? Where Jesus is saying some outrageous things, like if your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out, right? If your right hand makes you stumble, cut it off. What in the world is that? Okay. Well, that right there is an illustration of the futility of trying to keep the law in your own strength. You would literally have to start cutting off body parts if you wanted to be freed from the consequences of the law and the disobedience that we just fall into because of our human nature, right? He's saying, and so he's saying, no, 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 I did that for you. See, we understand now that he's the one, that had his body bruised and damaged and oh, just amazingly um, hurt over our sin, right? I mean, my goodness, right? Talks about not making false vows, but fulfill your vows to the Lord, right? He says, don't make any oath at all. Why? Don't make any oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is the footstool of his feet, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you make an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Of course, that was before hair coloring, but you understand what he's saying. But let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no, and anything beyond these is of evil. So what is that talking about? Well, when God speaks, he doesn't have to say, I swear by my own name. He just doesn't do, he just simply says yes or no, because he's God. Well, we're his kids and we have his genes. We are now genetically connected to the Father through Christ, right? Jesus lived here as a man. He's still a man sitting on the throne, right, at the right hand of God. And so by virtue of what he accomplished, we get a whole new set of spiritual genes, which means that when he shows us something and we say, yeah, yay or nay to it, it's enough. There's no need for us to try to invoke, some other thing, some higher reference point, to buttress whatever it is that we're saying, right? That's what you would do if you were still living under the law, because, you're still really not sure, if God's with me. Is he on my side? We know he is now. So we're no longer having to use these kinds of things that they had to use under the old covenant. And I love the rest of this stuff where he's talking about, the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth thing, right? Don't resist him who is evil. If someone slaps you on your right cheek, turn to him the other, right? If somebody wants to sue you, take your shirt. I think I mentioned this one before. Let him have your coat. Whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go 2. Give to him who asks. Don't turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. I mean, all of these things that he's saying all now relate to the fact that we can do these things. He is basically giving us a description of what we are now capable of as sons and daughters of the Most High. Again, I don't look at these things as demands or requirements, commandments that I must figure out how to obey or else. No, that's all been taken off the table because Jesus fulfilled it all perfectly. And again, because we are one with him, he's in me, I'm in him. I now, just because of that, I'm a walking fulfillment of the law, and so are you, because of Christ. Get that straight. And so here he now sums it up in what I was just alluding to early about the fact that we have now some great spiritual genes. Our genetics have been completely reworked because of the fact that it is Christ in me, the hope of glory, right? So check this out, right? You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Well, that was the law. He expands it. He says, I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Again, this is something that we're now capable of. In order that, here it comes, you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven, for he causes his sun, the star, not Jesus, he causes that sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax gatherers do the same? And if you greet your brothers only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the Gentiles or those that have no relationship with God, do the same. Therefore, you are to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. It's just like, wow. Because again, we're not reading this from the standpoint of what? How the heck? You want me to be perfect? That is totally absurd. That's crazy talk. How am I ever going to be perfect? I'm not perfect and I never will be. I mean, listen, that's how, we would normally respond to a statement like that. But Jesus here is saying that this derives out of us being sons and daughters of the Father. He's describing characteristics of sons and daughters of the Father. And so when we read this statement here where Jesus says, therefore, you are to be perfect, he's making a statement of fact and potential, not a statement of command. Therefore, you are to be perfect. You better be perfect. No, it's a statement that says, therefore, because you are sons and daughters of the Father, you are to be perfect. That was his intent from the beginning, that we would be perfect just as he is. And he has now made that absolutely possible. Okay. we are, because of Jesus living in me. I can look at any one of these commands that Jesus gave in his teachings and rejoice, because he's basically saying, hey, this is now what you're capable of. This is your potential. If you are confronted with one of these kind of situations, I've just given you an option that you can absolutely take in your response to that person or your response to that situation. Oh my gosh. It's phenomenal. I've mentioned this before in other broadcasts, but let me say it this way to you again, right? That the commands of God can actually now be viewed on our side here, this side of the cross, because we are his kids. We can view the commands of God as promises. Okay. that when he says, right, love one another as I have loved you, that's a command. We look at that now by saying, wow, thank you that you have empowered me to actually do that. That's not something I've got to try to strive after and work it up and make it happen. Oh, thank you, Lord, that is not what he had in mind. See, we are sons and daughters of the Father. Our spiritual genes are now his. All right. We have the capacity, because of Christ in us, because of us being in Christ, we have that capacity to actually do whatever he says that we should do. Right. And it's a whole different ballgame. I really can rest in him, in me. Say, well, Lord, thank you. I know I don't have this in myself, but you do. And therefore I do as well. I have access to who you are and what you have. It's mine. It's in me. And now I can actually accomplish this. I can do this thing. Okay. I mean, come on. It's just phenomenal once you start to get a handle on what he has done for us, and you step out from under that legalistic mindset, right? That wants you to just feel like you never measure up. You're always screwing up. You'll never learn. Oh my gosh, that's over and done with. Now, I guess I say we look at all this. Wow, that's my potential. That's what I can do because I'm one with Christ. Whew, come on. That should make your day happy. It does me all the way. Oh, goodness gracious. Look at all you guys just piling in here. Thank you so much. Um, Let's see. We have, whoa, Giancarlo, buddy. How are you? Man, it's been a long time. Hope you're doing well. Vanny, good morning. Joseph, good morning. Donna, the two Donnas are here. Good morning. And Shalom, Linda. Franny, how are you? Good to see you as always. Hey, Joe. Hope you guys are doing well. Helen, good morning. Great to have you guys along. I appreciate so much that you are taking this time to hang out. And thank you so much to those of you that share this video with the friends that you have on Facebook. I do appreciate that so much. I really am thankful that we get a chance to, just talk about some of these things that are so liberating for us. And I just want to I want to have more and more of God's kids step into that freedom, because it is just so amazing what he paid for. So reach out if you'd like to chat, either Facebook message or email. I would love to hear from you. And I do phone calls as well if you want to talk that way. I actually prefer phone calls more than texting or email. But reach out. We'll talk. We'll figure something out. So have an awesome day today. I look forward to being back with you tomorrow at 8:30 Eastern for a little more breakfast with Jesus. So till then, you be blessed.